We have had stories of women being beaten even by their spouses for entering politics. We watched the former governor of Nairobi slap a nominated woman member of parliament on television, only to apologize to her husband later. We have seen Moses Kuria, member of parliament Gatundu South, threaten to insert a glass bottle into Millie Odhiambo's vagina for daring to criticize the president. We directly witnessed as members of parliament, male members of parliament, left the chambers of parliament when the vote on the 2/3 bill was due. We have had male MPs call women politicians flower girls and listened to many women who would go into politics if only it were less violent. But we have also had stories of resilience and creativity. We've met people like Bina Maseno, who use makeup to mobilize young women voters in Nairobi. We've heard about women who changed their wardrobe and embraced the mother of the nation trope in order to navigate sexism. We witnessed women seeking endorsement by councils of elders, which are mainly controlled by men, and who got it even if it required that they tinker with gendered roles and attributes. We have learned about the IEBC registering women to vote at the coast during hours when they knew that their husbands would not be home, so as to make sure that women were able to vote, even if in secret. We have seen high-profile female politicians reinvent themselves time and time again in order to find and keep whatever little space is available to them. I am reading from a book called Where Women Are, Gender and the 2017 Elections. This book was edited by Nanjala Nabola. You see, these are the stories of women. This is her stories. And today, that's what we're here to talk about, stories of women. But not just that, how men can enable these stories to be amplified, how men can be allies in ensuring that women find their voices and use it. My name is Jim India. I'm the communication officer at Emerging Leaders Foundation. And I connect to this topic at a different level. In 2002, my mother did not vote because my father kept her national ID and her voter's card. And my father believed that politics was too lofty a matter for a simple-minded woman like my mother. And so she did not vote. Because of that, today, I want to tell her story. I am accompanied here with a panel of well-able men and women, and I want them to introduce themselves to you. So I will start with Eddie Orinda. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jim, and a very good afternoon to our viewers. By introduction, my name is Eddie Nicola Sombudarinda. I'm an advocate of the High Court of Kenya. I practice within the commercial division. I specialize in litigation and corporate law. I also do insolvency and practice under the name and style of One and Associates Limited Liability Partnership. Other than the practice of law, I'm also a lecturer at the United States International University, where I teach business law. My connection with the topic today is philosophy and how philosophy views the underlying principles of society that relate to gender and mainstreaming of women and girls within the society. And I'm happy to share my views this afternoon. I'm looking forward to having a fruitful discourse on this, both with the audience and with fellow panelists. Thank you very much for the opportunity to appear today.
Thank you, Eddie. I will now ask Stella Nderito to introduce herself.
Thank you, Jim. My name is Stella Nderito. My heart beats for women progress, women power, but mostly for teenage girls and young women in learning institutions. I am a youth development practitioner and also a gender equality champion. And my biggest concern today is about dominance in power. When you talk about gender equality, what do we have to say when it comes to dominance? Because equality is about dominance and it's about power. And I'm so happy to be part of this conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will now ask Dr. Funsho to introduce himself.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for connecting to this very timely conversation. Timely because we've had it for many years, and we seem to be still struggling that we haven't found a result yet. Timely because also we're not tired of talking about it. My name is Funsho Shumarin. I work for the African Development Bank based here in Nairobi. I'm the regional principal officer covering about a number of countries. And in my daily work, I try to look at the intersection between, environmental issues like climate change and the impact on vulnerability of people, particularly using the gender lens. What is the impact on women? What is the impact on women? And how do we appropriate investment response to make sure that we leave no one behind? But I also have a personal connection with the topic of today. So I'm an aspiring author, and I'm writing a book actually. And the book is very much focused on the man. And why is it focused on the man? I feel like some of the challenges we have in our society is largely due to the fact that we haven't understood what makes the man. And in the book, I try to look at the man in a three expression. One is the man in form of his maleness, the maleness of a man. And the second point is I try to look at the man in form of his own masculinity, and that's the masculinity of the man. And lastly, I look at the man in terms of his own manhood. And it's important because this is a book that is written for men, but also for women that love them, to understand that we need to understand who this man is and be able to see how to relate with him. And I'm hoping that in the course of the conversation today, I'll be able to share some of my ideas from the book. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Funsho. Dr. Ndeko, your turn.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. Good evening to everyone. It's a pleasure for me to be here this evening because indeed, this is a subject that people have grappled with for many, many years. However, I'm coming in from the perspective of man and woman created he them. And he did not create them unequal. He gave them the very same opportunity to be able to do things. However, he created them different in the certain things that they were able to do, the man and the woman. However, it was not in terms of inability, it was in terms of you have this ability and you have this ability, and each one of you can actually do what you need to do to the highest potential. I am a chiropractor and have been so for very many years, and I am now a coach. Why am I going into coaching? Because I believe that each and every individual, male, female, young, old, should be able to reach their highest potential at any given time without any hindrance from anyone, so that they can express who they came to be on this earth. And no one should stop anyone from being able to do that. So I hope to have good discussions with all of you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ndeko. So straight into it, I'll start with you, Eddie, do we have a level playing field for men and women in this country? Be it in politics, be it in the economy, is the playing field level for everyone? Do we have equal opportunities and equal access to opportunities, in your opinion?
Thank you, Jim. I think in responding to that question, while appreciating the milestones that have been made throughout the world, and particularly in Kenya, in terms of the sensitivity that the Kenyan society now has towards gender issues or legislation, or whichever perspective you may want to consider it from, I wish to take us back a little. And that is to begin to interrogate from a philosophical point of view, what the underlying principles in any society would be, even the simplest society. And I must say, so far it's been about justice, it's been about morality, it's been about conduct. But I think some of the most basic underlying principles that constitute any society, in my view, are twofold. The first one is mutual need. And the second is aptitude. Now, talking about mutual need, men by their very nature are not self-sufficient, whether you want to look at it from a social point of view or reproductive point of view. So there's no question and there's no contest as to the value men and women add to each other in an inclusive society like the one we live in, and particularly in Kenya today. Secondly, considering aptitude, we all are good at different things, and therefore we must also draw the same analogy to the debate or discussions around gender issues and gender mainstreaming. Different people are good at different things. Men are talented at different things, and so are women. And so I think in responding to that question, what I would like us to begin to interrogate is whether we have indeed moved away from a justice perspective to a point at which we are now deliberately taking steps to sensitize young people and our children towards a value-based society, which incorporates very basic values like self-respect, mutual respect, coexistence, appreciation of the different dynamics that the gender debate brings into play, and the value of men and women working together for the mutual growth of the society. So, of course, there's a lot of progress, a lot of tremendous progress that has been made in this respect in terms of legislation, in terms of affirmative action, in terms of representation of women. But of course, the question still remains whether enough has been done. So I think
Dr. Eddie, has enough been done? Has enough been done? Are we an equal society based on, you say there's tremendous progress that has been made based on those progress and of the legislation? Are we an equal society?
Well, it is not expected that in an ideal situation you would have a society that's equal in many respects. However, very deliberate steps must be taken to ensure that women and girls who by design most of the time are vulnerable either because they do not have the access that they need to have in getting education or getting empowerment or getting exposure, or practices that generally prevent them from having the benefit of all the things that we're talking about, for instance, early marriages or female genital mutilation and so on and so forth, which in my view, legislation has attempted to deal with. Okay. So I think if you want to consider whether or not we are equal as a society, I think in many respects we still are not, because there's still a lot of questions around whether women are properly represented in leadership, for instance, whether girls are getting the quality of life that they need to get, or whether girls have equal opportunities in the workplace vis-a-vis the competition that they have to face against men for the same positions, same responsibilities, and so on and so forth. But I think it's a question, I think it's not a question of sensitizing the society to appreciate that the different aptitudes that I was talking about is what is going to give us a sum total of a value-based growth that would then lead to the equal society that we are considering, because each one of us has a role to play.
Okay, So I'm going to bring you, Stella, into this, just based on what Dr. Eddie has just said, that there is a lot has been done, but it sounds like there's still a lot to be done. Is that your feeling? And what are some of the things that are still hindering us from achieving an equal society? Because, and basically, as you answer that, you could also maybe talk on, is equality an ideal situation, or can it be a reality?
Thanks, Jim. Of course, when we talk about is the ground level, it's an issue of equality. And that means we can't ignore the issue of gender, because what is gender? Gender is the social, cultural attributes and behavioral expectations associated with being a man or a woman. And then now gender equality is about how all these aspects play with each other and determine how men and women relate with each other, and the power that emanates from that. So, so then that takes us to thinking what is expected of a woman, her roles, and what's expected of a man. And are these gender roles empowering, or are they exploitative, or are they oppressive or inspiring? When you understand it from that, then you just come back to your society and ask, so what are women expected to do and what are men expected to do? And that's when you can see the gender inequalities that we have. So the question was, what then do we need to do? I think we first need to examine how do we do things. Do we tell the stories of women the same way we tell the stories of men? Do we tell her story like we tell history? Yeah. What has been the role of women in social, economic, and political development? And do we have women philosophers, for instance, when we talk about history? Yeah. Do we see her story? I don't know. How does the media tell the story of women? How do we see women in political development or political engagement? So for me, it's about what do we need to see and how are we addressing structural barriers, because that's where they come from. All these gender inequalities are actually enabled by structural barriers. So it's in what we see in religious institutions, yeah? Is women's participation encouraged, or is it diminished from that? Do we see women having power when it comes to religious institutions? Council of elders, for instance, who hold social and political authority. Do we have women elders, or is it just men elders? And when we lack women elders, then it means that they're a bit more biased towards men. So all these things, we have to look at them by looking at structural barriers and just addressing these structural barriers.
Okay. Dr. Funcho, Stella speaks about structural barriers. As a professional, as an employer, do you think that organizations should intentionally seek out to hire women? Because I read the statistics that women make up only 39% of the world's workforce. And of that, of the total number of people who make up management positions, women make up only 27% of that. So is there a need, for instance, to intentionally hire women, or should we stick to a meritocratic society where we say everyone, it is survival for the fittest, whoever is qualified comes in? Or should we have a quota system that says, hey, women might be less likely to be hired, so let's intentionally hire them into certain positions?
Thank you. And thank you to the two previous speakers. I felt like jumping in when Eddie was speaking. I'm going to be very direct about this. See, what we call society today is basically a social construct. And that construct is just a construct of our idea of norms, of our culture, of our way of life. And when you bring it down to the relationship between men and women, the unfortunate thing is that the society we have created has not allocated, does not see it as a union of two equals. And I think it's very important, because what we're trying to do is to correct that notion. So it has never been a union of two equals. I'll tell you, I am directly involved in development projects across the region. And when you are doing design and you need to do stakeholder consultation, in some cases, you have to call the women aside and chase them anyway in order for them to be very free to talk. And in some cases as well, the men will want you to follow their decision, and because they think they're in a better position to make a decision for the other person. So the construction of our society is not perfect. What we're trying to do is to fix it. And when I mean fix it, we're coming from a very low base, and everything we're trying to do is just meet somewhere halfway. Are we there yet? Absolutely not. Are we making progress? Relatively so, but it's very marginal on that. So coming to the question about what is happening in the global workforce, and it's basically that the whole construction that is not based on a union of two equals. We don't see them the same on the same level. Even in so-called developed countries, you see today there's still a debate about equal pay in the US. And you hear the way it's been approached, because those who are in favor of lower pay for women believe that the requirement for women is not the same as the requirement for men, and ultimately the effort on the women's side is not the same on the men's side. And now to answer that question, and I think that is where we've seen the move for affirmative action. Affirmative actions that are very much geared towards recognizing that if you have 50% of your population either underempowered or underrepresented, you're not doing yourself any good. It's a missed opportunity to have half of your global population not being empowered as much as the other half. And that is exactly what we've seen in some of our countries in Africa, with repressive policies and cultural norms that have limited women below men. When it comes to the workforce, I think what is important is to recognize the specific roles that each gender plays. And I think I really want to jump on the point that Stella raised as well, and to define the parameters of existence for each role. So you don't expect a man who is going to carry forklift, to do the same work as a woman. But in the space that a woman is, it's important that in that space, she's adequately compensated in response to the problem that she's solving. And also recognizing the fact that she is faced constantly by enormous challenges, either childbearing, either homekeeping, and all of that. And to include that, integrate that into either the payment system, but also in the recruitment system. Let me leave you with the last point. And it's quite unfortunate. So beyond the work that I do at African Development Bank, on the side, I am involved in an investment company that provides financial services to SMEs. And it will surprise you to know that women are better fund managers than men. So we have more trouble with men repaying their loans than women. And then, and we must recognize, I'm not telling you about stories from documents. This is real life data from what we've experienced here in Kenya. So then the question then again is, why do you still consider a woman lower, even when she has the potential to meet the economic imperatives that are needed? The last point, and we should think about it, is the comparison should not be on the gender line. The comparison should be on their specific functioning, ability to function in their roles. Some of the best managed countries right now under COVID are those led by women. Even though there are few, countries led by women are doing way better than those led by men. So it's about what role is she playing? How do you recognize that role? How do you provide incentives for her to continue to play that role better? Thank you.
So it's a bit surprising. You seem to say that women have the potential to contribute to the economy, but you also seem to insinuate that there are probably some things that men are good at that women are not good at, and there are things that women are good at that men are not good at. And does that apply in the workforce, Dr. Ndeko? Do you think that there are definitely things that women are good at that men are horrible at, and there are things that, and the vice versa? Is that true? Is that something you've experienced?
Perhaps I come from a very privileged background, and a background where women were not going to school, but my father insisted that his sisters went to school. And so I come from the background where I never understood what it was that people were talking about when they were talking about gender imbalance. Why were women trying to talk about women liberation? Because the women that were in my circles were women who did what they needed to do when they needed to do it. And it was not whether they were, big people or not. My mother herself was able to do what she wanted to do throughout her life, her married life as well. And so when we come to the modern world, shall we call it, or today's world, it's very sad for us to be here discussing the idea of gender imbalance or gender this or gender that. As I started, I said that when he created, the creator created, he created them both equal in the abilities of what they could do. However, the difference was, as we have talked about earlier, that a man cannot give birth to a child. Neither can a woman give a man a pregnancy. And so those are the differences that we have within our various different roles. When it comes to the workplace, it's not about whether I can give birth to a child or not. It's not about whether the man can give birth to a child or not. It's about, do I have the capacity, the capability, the whatever it is that it takes to make sure that I can get the job done. And it's not whether I am a woman or I'm a man so that I can do a good job at this or a good job at that. I happen to be very good at what I do, whatever it is that I do. And therefore, I should be taken from that perspective. It's not about whether I'm male or female. Do I have the capacity that job requires? And if I have the capacity, I should be able to be given the job and be paid what that job is supposed to be. It's not about whether I'm male or female. And so it's a travesty that we in our country continue to consider the woman the lesser person, when the woman, in fact, is just the same as the man. The only difference is this one can give birth and this one cannot, and the various different responsibilities that might go with that. And that's my take, because each person would be aspiring to be the best at whatever it is they do. If I'm a woman and I'm a weightlifter, I will do my best. Yes.
Dr. Ndeko, that sounds very interesting. And allow me to ask you this.
Yes.
And that women should be taken based on what they're able to do. But aren't there things that do not enable that? For instance, there's data that I came across on one of the UN websites that says women devote 3 times more hours a day to unpaid domestic work as compared to men. And so the hours that they would have spent doing paid work, they spent doing unpaid work, whereas men use those hours to do paid work. Aren't such things creating the divide that now we're talking about?
It's because of the society, as Dr. Fushat was talking about, in the sense that society has made that what is supposed to be. If you go to some of the Western world today, you'll find that there are men who are the ones who are staying at home and doing that work of, doing the cleaning and what have you. All right, perhaps because there's a certain level of understanding now that it's not really necessary that the man is the one who goes to work and the woman stays at home. The roles can be reversed. And so the man will probably be spending more time on doing that unpaid work, as it were. It's just about what is our mindset? What are we thinking about when we are deciding that this person should do this because they are female and that person should do that because they are male?
And Jim, can I comment? Okay. Yes, so I have to also say that unpaid care work has to do with structural barriers again, and it has to do with governance, because that's why we have gender responsive public services. A lack of provision of these services then leads women to doing more unpaid care work. And a good example is if there's no good access to clean water, and sanitation, it then pushes women to do that, because a lot of times it is women collecting water, it is women tending to their children, So if we do not have adequate early childhood centers, then it is women who are forced to stay with the children because they're the primary caregivers, and that's what is expected of them. So the more we have adequate gender responsive public services, then the less unpaid care work we have. So we have to always link all these gender inequalities to the structural issues and how they are financed. Because at the end of the day, women carry more burden when it comes to caregiving and taking care of domestic chores.
So we say they take more responsibility.
Jim, I wish to point out a couple of things, but let me also just make it very clear from the outset that I take the position that women are not lesser than men. In fact, when I pointed out that one of the underlying principles that we must interrogate when we talk about gender mainstreaming is aptitude, is that it's a fact of life that different people are good at different things. And therefore I take the position that sex cannot be used as the basis to draw the difference in social function of either men or women. So let me take us back to some of the sentiments that I gave earlier. Because if we do not interrogate the social construction of society as it is sensitively while addressing the imbalances in gender that we're talking about, we run a very huge risk of destabilizing that same social construction that is intended to strengthen the position of women in society. And the reason that I say that is that if we take the position that men and women are equal in the manner that we're doing right now, then we're running into the risk of first and foremost disregarding that social construction and the role that we both play, and the fact that we all add a lot of value to the natural growth of society if we concentrate on what we are all good at. And I do not wish to be mistaken to say that, for instance, women are only good at taking care of children and bringing them up. I'm one of those who've taken the position that children must be brought up by both parents and by the society, and that children must grow up in an environment in which a certain value system has been set, where they catch those values naturally, because what we see in society today, in children and in young people, is a reflection of what that society constitutes and what it's made up of, which then takes us back to questioning what our role has been in developing that value system. So I'm very hesitant to take the position that we must still remain at the affirmative action stage, or that we should continue to talk about justice alone. Having put in place legislative measures, for instance, and having taken affirmative action, and having started the debates on the 2/3 gender rule, what then have we begun to do as a society for posterity to ensure that young people growing up are then growing up on the basis of a certain value system that is going to naturally.
Allow me just to interject and make a point that, for instance, when you talk about legislation, it is crystal clear that the 2/3, for instance, gender rule, it's in the Constitution, it's supposed to happen, we've gone to court, but up to date, men have refused to implement that. And so can we only rely on the laws that are made by the very men who refuse to implement those very laws that they make?
No, that is arguable. And I think when you consider these policy initiatives and processes, I think women in the positions that they already are also must take very deliberate steps in applying pressure that would then ensure that these objectives are met. For instance, and I'm happy with what Dr. Fonsu pointed out, that we continue to look at women as being vulnerable in society, when in a lot of quarters, and instances, they have done a lot better than men have. And therefore, one of the things that I must point out is, look, for instance, women who sit in influential positions can take the position that if the head of state or the executive does not take seriously mainstreaming of the gender issues that we're talking about, that they would not even accept certain appointments in the first place as a protest, because you may want to squarely place this. You may want to squarely place the 2/3 limitation on men alone, but you will realize that there were certain bottlenecks that did not necessarily have to do with men in those achievements not being met. So I think,
well,
again,
Eddie, I'll bring in now the voice of Stella, but also just to note that, for instance, I don't know what bottlenecks existed when the president failed to appoint. That was just an appointment. He does not need anything else. He just needs to appoint and say, I have a cabinet of 14 and X number are going to be women, I'm going to observe. He does not need anything. It's just men refusing to uphold the law. But Stella, I'm going to bring you in here just to comment, because I saw you react to what Dr. Eddie was saying. What are your reactions to that?
First, I have to say that one of the greatest barriers of gender equality is the stereotype that women are less leaders, and that just the issue of male dominance in power, yeah? And why we still haven't achieved or passed our gender bill is simply because of lack of political will. And look at the people in politics who are dominating our politics right now. It's an issue of male dominance, and we have to face it and say that. That's the challenge, the perception about women leaders. Because if we all and look at even when they're voting in parliament, what's the problem? Yeah, is that people did not show up. Why didn't they show up? And what reasons do they give? They say that, oh, women are going to do this and this. And that's the problem, because the way we scrutinize women in leadership is not the way we scrutinize men. So we always have all these many reasons why we don't think this should pass, because, let women fight for their space, but the space is not, it's not level, it's not. And that's where we bring in the issue of equity. So it's a very complex situation, but it's definitely about our socialization, our perception of women, and what we need to do. And we also have to understand that there is the effect of not making sure that we have gender equality. There is, but mostly it's about perception, yeah, and male dominance. That's the issue.
Dr. Funch,
Jim, can I come in?
Dr. Funch, I want you to come in, and I want you to particularly, even as you comment on that, I would also like you to answer the question. I know you've been in Kenya long enough to answer the question: are we ready for a female president? Can we, as a country, elect a female president? And what's stopping us?
Jim, thank you. Before we started, you actually encouraged us to be authentic. Now, I know a lot of people are listening. I'm just going to say it the way it is. Listen, there are people benefiting from lower women involvement in government. There are people benefiting from that. And the truth about it is that until we are able to create a higher level of benefit, a perception of higher level of benefit by involving women and by meeting what the Constitution requires, we may not be able to make much progress. So it's very important to, and it speaks to that, what are those bottlenecks? And there are people who think by having higher women, some men may not have chances, and they will do everything possible to block that. So you must ask yourself, when a system fails, who are the beneficiary of a failed system? That may be your starting point, because you must be able to tell who are the ones benefiting from a failed system of adequate gender participation. That is the first part. The second part as well is, I think we must also understand that power means different things to different people. And in the issue of politics is basically about power at play. And for some people, it's a power over the other gender. And for some people, it's a power within a particular gender. What I think is very important is we need a combination of those who are going to be champions within the male group fighting for women representation, but also we're going to need a lot of female role models within the female group as well to show that, listen, we can do it. You know, I'll be very honest with you. Some time ago, I attended a meeting, and this is a true story. It was in Turkey. It was a global roundtable on Somalia. And this was Somalia security. And every country represented came in with their ministers of defense. And the Kenyan minister, in this case, the CS, is a female person. And the Egyptian minister could not believe it. He didn't know that his microphone was on. And he was like, huh? How can a woman be leading defense? I'm serious, true story. And everyone was shocked. And obviously, he found a way to apologize. And that is that notion that certain sectors of the economy, certain departments in the government should be male-dominated, such as defense. And it was very embarrassing for the Egyptian minister. And that is that you need people to be able to say, listen, can a woman do it? Yes. And here's the evidence to show that they've done it well. And you need on the other side of the hive, people who will say, listen, we don't have anything to benefit from not having adequate representation of women. So I wanted to give that particular example. Now to the question about, can a woman lead? Absolutely yes. Absolutely yes. Let me tell you a very personal story. And I know this is live YouTube. I may run into trouble for this. 9 years ago, when I was expecting our first child, now because when I was younger, I'd created a notion in my head that I was going to build an empire. I wanted my first child to be a boy because I was going to name him Funsho Jr. You know all those things you do when you're in your shower, you know, by yourself. And then when the result came, it showed that it was going to be a girl. So as educated as I was, as exposed as I was, I kept quiet, but I felt a little bit disappointed. And may God forgive me for that. Now, eventually the baby came and the girl has grown. She's almost 9 years old. And I see a lot of myself in her, to the extent that if my life ends today, that young girl, I see her as somebody capable to run the empire far more than even probably the boy. You may say, well, it's too early to tell. And I've been able, and that has changed my mind, how we look at people. I've seen a lot of intelligent people who are able to run a small enterprise, from a small enterprise to an empire, from an empire to a county, to a country, you know, name it. So does a woman have what it takes to run a country? Absolutely yes. The question of we should be given a chance is a challenge. But does she have natural ability? Does she have, you know, demonstrable competence to do it? The answer is yes. And I think we should continue to look for that in Africa because we do need that. Thank you. I know I've said a lot of things, but I was just so passionate about it.
Thank you so much, Funsho. I'm going to bring in Dr. Ndeko. Having tested the political waters yourself, walk us through what you think is the greatest challenge for a woman venturing into politics in this country today. And what are some of those, again, back to the question that I'd asked Funsho, is it possible? Are we ready as a society for a woman president based on your experience?
Thank you, Jim. Before I say anything, just recently, earlier this week, I was watching a documentary on somebody called Viola, I'm forgetting her second name, Viola Brendan, something like that. She was a Canadian woman who was a beautician. She believed in the equality of Black and white, let alone male and female. She was doing her best in what her capacity was, and her desire was to have a chain of businesses all along Canada. She was a Black woman. She did not believe that her color was going to make a difference. And so she went into a theater, a movie theater, which had a segregation of seating areas. And she took her ticket, and she didn't realize that, but she took her ticket and went and sat in one of the seats that was reserved for white people. That was Viola from Canada. And then we have the lady from the USA. She was a house help. She was Rosa Parks. And some people think that maybe Obama became president of that nation because of the work of people like Martin Luther King, but they don't realize that Rosa Parks, the lady who was a house help, is the one who actually brought change to that nation. Viola in Canada actually had done that prior to that particular instance. She sacrificed a lot. And these are women who have changed nations, and we can read about them now. However, their stories were hidden before. Now, so some of us who believe that it is possible to do anything thought that it was possible to change the way that the nation is being run. And so, as I said earlier, when you believe that you have a calling to do something, you go ahead and do it, not because your gender or whatever is suggesting it, but because you believe that you have a role to play in that particular area. And so I thought I had a role to play in politics. And I did run for a political seat twice, and I failed. However, you asked the question, is Kenya ready for a female president? Unfortunately, you cannot change society effectively only by legal measures. Even if you have affirmative action, the men who are there suggest to the women that are there under affirmative action that they wouldn't be there were it not for affirmative action. And so I, during my campaign trail, recognized that Kenyans are not ready for women leaders because we are a very patriarchal society. And by virtue of that, people have not had the right mindset to recognize the competence and the capability and the possibility of having women elected into position as leaders. And so we might imagine that somebody can run for president, but I don't think that under the current situation, as we have not even continued to imbibe and actually activate and implement the current constitution, let alone having 1/3 in parliament, we are not ready as a society. It is only when the society begins to change the mindset and recognize that a leader can be either a male or a female, depending on their capacity and competency, that we will have that change. And it is possible, but we need to begin to think that way in order for us to actually move ahead and begin to see the right people in the right positions at the right times, be they male or female.
Thank you. And finally, Adi, as we wrap up this conversation around the politics, how do we recalibrate a society that is deeply, girls are raised to think that, decision-making tables should be occupied by men, and men are raised to think that they can legitimately exclude women from those tables. That's from the raising. And so a lot of the change and a lot of the conversations that we need to have, as Dr. Ndeko was saying, they might not happen at the policy level. They might happen at the family level. They might happen at the friendship level. So in your opinion, how do we recalibrate our society and change the whole perception that we have towards women and just gender roles?
Thank you, Jim. I think I share Dr. Ndeko's sentiments that it would not happen by itself. The society has to be hard enough to begin to appreciate that as long as those roles can be played by women, then women deserve a chance to occupy those positions and play leadership roles. And I think my reaction would be a very straightforward one. More and more and more women have to get involved in politics, because it is true that if you try it alone, as Dr. Ndeko did, even if you succeed in coming in, you face the challenge of those very limitations that we're talking about, and the stereotypes, and the belief that you can only be in leadership as a woman at a certain level. But the more women get involved in party politics, in community politics, in national politics, the greater that space is going to be opened, and the more the society is going to begin to appreciate that indeed women have a role to play, and when given a chance, they can play it better. But it may be very difficult to continue to entrench these political aspirations through affirmative action. And we've seen the limitations that are in that. And I agree with what Dr. Funso said as well, that sometimes that supremacy and power is within a certain gender or over the other gender, mostly to the disadvantage of women. And as we've pointed out, women have a very critical role to play where they've had a chance to play leadership role. They've done it very well. And so I think the challenge I'd like to throw to all the women in this country, and directly starting with Stella and Dr. Ndeko, is that she has to run again, and they have to encourage more women to run, and to run again and again and again until we get to a point where it is normal that when we engage in this political discourses, it's not about being a man or a woman, but rather about a higher calling towards certain aspirations that we have as a country, so that if it is a woman who is able to take us there, so be it.
Thank you, Eddie. One of the things that we've done at Emerging Leaders Foundation is a little social experiment. During our programs, we have a session where we allow the fellows to vote. And one interesting trend that we have noticed when voting is that just before the vote, we have a session on gender and politics. And here we talk about why it is important to have women in elective positions. And immediately after that session, we have the elections happen. Now, surprisingly, almost 80% of the time, the person who emerges as the president of the class is always a woman, almost 80% of the time. And our conclusion from this experiment has been that if voter education was more intentional on educating the voter on the importance of electing a woman, there is a likely chance that we will see a difference, and we will normalize seeing women elected into positions of authority.
Absolutely.
So I felt just to add that a bit about the work that we do at Emerging Leaders Foundation. Stella, you had a point to make as we wrap this up.
Yeah, and thanks, Dr. Eddie, for the challenge that I should run again, because yes, I've run in campus, but I'd love to run again when the space is safer, because in this country, a woman cannot campaign peacefully at night. She has to be accompanied by men. Yeah, in this country, and I just want you to see how unequal the space is, the ground is. Yeah, in this country, you can have a male governor and a male deputy governor. Yeah, but today, if governor, if you have a female governor and she nominates a female deputy governor, that's problematic. Yeah, and in fact, she might not win because they still want to see a man, so male dominance. So we have to bring the conversation back home and say, you know what, the ground is not level. It's not level. And until we remove the perception that women are not less leaders, then we're still far from achieving gender equality.
Thank you for everyone who...
Jim, if I may, just a quick reaction.
Just before you say that, allow me to just recognize our viewers and everyone who's watching us, from Linda Korir, who's tuned in from Chebarbar. She says she agrees with Sarah that we need to address the perception of gender in existing structures. Then there's this thing called patriarchy. That's according to Linda. And Masio Erimu, a very important point about adequate compensation for the role that women play in serving is paramount. And so we have also Kamameti Enoch. Thank you for watching. You're watching from Nakuru, and you say that you attended one of our trainings and it was powerful, and now you're changing the lives of young people in Nakuru. Please keep doing that. And we have Sonia, who asked a very interesting question to no one in particular. If any one of you would like to respond to what Sonia Rasugu has asked, who is it that gives women a chance? How did they get that power to give that chance? So it can be noted down, and anyone who'd like to respond to it would respond to it. Ahmed Mualim Ado, considering history of leadership, should we go for quality representation or quantity representation? Should we have quality women or more women? That's an interesting question. Cordero, I'm following this discussion and I see a serious flaw. We are using politics as the excuse for downgrading other gains that have been made in expanding the space for women to participate in development. why are we only looking at politics and assuming that women are nowhere in driving the country's and Africa's development? So he feels that politics should not be the only yardstick that we use, and that there are other places where gains are being made. Neema Irene, mindset change is needed together with affirmative action. I agree with that point. Tess Njoki is tuned in, and she says that there's need to change the mindset and perceptions of general beliefs on the position of a woman in the society. Diana Sifuna says that gender inclusion is a human right. To change the lack of adoption for the two-thirds gender rule, we must agitate, just like Daktari has said. We need both men and women as advocates. For us to achieve two-thirds gender rule, we need both men and women as advocates. And so there's a lot more. I could keep reading that, but just thank you for watching. If you have any questions, just send them in and I will ask them to our panelists. I don't know if anyone picked any question that they would like to respond to.
Jim,
yes,
that's good point. And I wrote this point down. I wanted to drop on it. That please, let's not fall into the error of using just one lens, politics, as a way to really judge. And I actually wrote something here that social leadership is beyond politics or beyond, holding public offices. I'll be honest, in the economic space, we've actually made a lot of progress. I work in an organization where we have more female Kenyans than male Kenyans in our office. And I'm not talking of people who are I'm talking of leaders, people who are leading teams, who are, championing the direction that development should be going. And I know it's the case in the private sector as well. Compared to other countries, I love the conversation in Kenya where we keep pushing the boundary to say we need to do more. Now, if we have to compare Kenya to other countries, I'm originally from Nigeria, compared to other countries, we've made tremendous progress in Kenya, particularly on the economic front. And that's why we must look at this in a whole spectrum, across the whole spectrum, to be able to acknowledge and appreciate the progress that we have made. Now, having said that as well, is there a way we can leverage on that progress to cover other areas, including the politics? And I think that's where the opportunities are. And I can tie that to the question about who needs to give women representation. And I think the truth is both gender need to do that. Men must embrace and acknowledge that women can also play this role as much as they can, if not even better. And women must also begin to say, listen, we're not going to be discouraged by the disparity. We're going to push forward. And so for Dr. Ndeko, I would love to see you run again, but this time around, I would rather prefer that the male leaders are the ones who are saying, we need you. So they are kind of engineering a leadership for you because they've been able to see the things you've done in other places, in other sector, in other industry, as opposed the idea of, guys, give me a chance. You're not going to beg for a chance. You must get it because you have results to show for it. And I know that basically that's not the case in your case. I mean, you're a respected leader in the society. So again, let's understand it. What are the other things that they're doing well? Community leadership, the ability to support things like education, reaching the vulnerable group. And let's push that forward, as this is what makes a society. It's not sitting in parliament, arguing over increased pay or low pay and all that. Can we get to have leadership that reaches the people that need it most? And I think this is where a lot of our community leaders, female community leaders, have done well. And we must tell that stories. We must really tell that story of what they're doing. I'm going to keep it there, but thank you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I came to the point of realizing that it's not about just running and running and running again. And that's why I said society must change. And I like the idea the way people are looking at and saying that a mindset must change. And that's why you're also speaking about the fact that the men's minds must also change. So it's a mindset change that is going to change this country. And leadership is not just about parliament. Leadership is not just about politics. You're absolutely right. Each person has the capacity to lead where they are. And that will change society. If everyone listening today in this particular situation decides that they're going to change their mindset to recognize that a person who has the capacity to do whatever they can should be able to be given that opportunity, then we will begin to have a momentum. We will begin to have that mindset change where people are recognizing that I have the capacity to do something, I will go forward. I like what, was it Sonia? Somebody called Sonia who said, who's giving who a chance? You must be the one to give yourself a chance. Nobody gave me a chance. I wasn't looking for a chance. I was looking for an opportunity to serve. So don't think about being given a chance. Take responsibility for what you have the capacity to do, go forward and go and do it. Whether you're male, whether you're female. And that's why I said I come from the perspective of let every person recognize their potential wherever they are, whoever they are, and whatever it is that they're doing, and then we will begin to see change happening.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Neko. Recently, we had an interesting, a sad news, to be honest. It wasn't very interesting, where it was reported that there was widespread teenage pregnancy in this country. And in fact, my mother, I saw on her WhatsApp status, said this might be the real pandemic that we're having. And so think about it. Men came out and said, a lot of these girls are being impregnated by their fellow boys, fellow teenage boys. And so this is not an issue about men. But to think about it, it is actually an issue about men, because these young male boys who are impregnating young girls, what will happen to this girl? She'll most likely drop out of school. She'll most likely get married early. She'll most likely get married to an abusive man. She'll most likely not make correct decisions about her sexual health. And a lot of other things will happen. But this boy has the opportunity to go ahead with school and ultimately ascend to positions of power if he so wishes. But this girl is not able to. And so even as we talk about politics and say that politics is not the only yardstick, at the ground level, at the base level, the conversations must start at the disadvantages that goes through. Stella, as somebody who works a lot with teenage girls, what was your impression and what do you think needs to be done to correct the anomaly that we currently have in society, especially around teenage pregnancy?
Yeah. Jim, first I have to start and say that our work at Dada Power has shown that it's less than 20% of teenage pregnancies that are by their peers, by boys. So a majority of the teenage pregnancies are by adult men. So for me, the first recommendation I have to say is that these are violators, because the moment you impregnate a child, because teenage girls are under the age of 18, then you need to face the full force of the law. Yeah. So for me, the first thing is let them face the law, let them be prosecuted, because those are violators and perpetrators of violence. And we, as a nation, we have to understand the effects of teenage pregnancies, ranging from trauma, economic vulnerability of families, and it definitely contributes to the cycle of poverty. So these are children, and we have to protect our children. And that's why, for me, I feel that it's important for us to focus on the issue of politics and even have more women in politics, because they need to go there and transform our issues of power and our issues of leadership. I believe that if we had a president who is a woman, then we'd have less cases of femicide, for instance, would have less cases of gender-based violence, would have less cases of teenage pregnancy. Why? Because they relate personally to these issues. Yeah. So for teenage pregnancies, I see it as an issue of human rights and as an urgent issue, because these are our children, and this is our future, whether we like it or not. Those are people who are supposed to be future nation builders, but then their future is very much altered, because then they actually risk not having any economic power to be able to fend for their families, to be able to fend for themselves, to even gain skills to build a nation. That's how I look at teenage pregnancy. Let's not say that a lot of these girls become pregnant because of their peers. No, it's not. That's not the case. And it definitely has to be a conversation about local leaders who are protecting these violators. Yeah. We cannot have a case of fathers raping their own daughters and uncles. The issue of incest in Western Kenya is not like a norm, So no, we are failing ourselves by not protecting our children. Our girls need protection.
And Stella, as you say that, I'm reminded that I had a social experiment again today with my friends on different platforms, and I asked them, what are some of the things that you've gone through as a woman that disgust you? And a majority of them who use public transportation says, we have creepy men in Nairobi's matatus who feel they are entitled to touch a certain way, to rub, themselves on a woman anyhow. That if you're catcalled as a woman and you say no, you'll most likely be insulted. That's what will follow afterwards. And so this just points to systemic bad manners among the male species, to be honest. And so, Eddie, I'd like to bring you.
I'd
like to just bring.
I have to share a conversation we had with young women, and we asked them, just assume there was no man in your space, what would you do? And we had young women say, I would run more at night. I would use public transport more. So what's the issue? The issue is a lot of women actually look at men as a threat to their security. And it's not just an assumption, it's actually from experience. So we need to make our homes and our spaces and our schools more safe for women. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Eddie, how do we raise our boys differently? How do we raise our girls differently to create a safer environment for girls so that they have this opportunity to prosper, to go through education, to have a better life, and essentially at the end of the day, get into politics that we should not be talking about right now. So how do we ensure that we are creating that ladder that they're able to go up to? What is the role of mentorship? How should men raise their voice differently? Eddie.
Jim, I think Stella and Dr. Ndeko have raised fairly fundamental issues in what has gone wrong within our social construction. And that the current crisis we are dealing with has only exposed it and is reflective of the kind of society that we have transformed ourselves into. And we have also told and painted a picture of what it looks like. But here's what I'd like to say. Why don't we begin by telling the good stories of men who are an example in society? For instance, that can then be a representation of what young men can begin to emulate. And I'd like to share my own personal story. I have a son who's 6 years old. At the time he was born overseas, the mother was literally in medical university doing medicine. And I had to jump into the role of nursing him and bringing him up and doing all the associated things that you do with the upbringing of a child, including traveling overseas with him for 2 months so the mother could have the space and energy to recuperate and find herself back and concentrate on what she considered very important at the time, which was to become a doctor. And I've been centrally involved in his upbringing and in developing a value system in him that in fact led to a very deliberate decision of not allowing anyone else in his life for the first 3 years so that he could catch those values. He is growing up as a very responsible young man who appreciates mutual respect, appreciates respect for women, appreciates respect for motherhood. And the challenge I'd like to throw back to all of us is we have to go back there so that rather than talk about all the negative things associated with men in society today, we go back to emphasizing the need for families to collectively participate in bringing up young boys that then turn into the responsible men that we wish to look up to in the society today. So my challenge to Stella and Dr. Ndeko is we also have to start telling the good stories of good men, like Dr. Funso, like myself, like Jim, and so on and so forth, so that we have a poster of what also represents what it ought to be, rather than building our lives around the sticky circumstances we find ourselves in today because of the social construction we have in society. So I do not want to be misunderstood to support any of the negative things that have been pointed out by Stella. I think those are issues of concern, and we must take very, very deliberate steps in first and foremost raising responsible children who are catching those values from us, because this is a reflection of what this society looks like. So perhaps those data that have been talked about point to what kind of families we have today and what kind of men and women we have today. So I don't think it's a question of justice anymore. We have to now move away from justice. And of course, in the process of dealing with it, also subject the perpetrators to the criminal justice system and use them as an example to other people who need to learn that society works in a different way and that we must have respect for the space within which we live. But I think, to answer your question, the solution is in beginning to talk about the marriages that work, talking about men that are responsible, and also telling the stories of those men, because I think that's going to make a whole lot of difference.
Thank you. And Dr. Ndeko as well, I think the same question: how have you raised your children differently? What role does mentorship have to play in all this? So that we have a society where it's different and it's easier for women than it is right now and that it was it in the past. How does the family and play that role, and how does mentorship play that role?
I tend to agree with Eddie in the sense that it begins at home. The values is what we have lost. The values that people were taught, which were to be respectful, to do the right thing at all times, and to learn how to, control oneself. I know that there was a time when there was a bill that was in Parliament at one time. I think Njokindungu was there and she had brought it forward. And there was a suggestion that men should be castrated if they are found to be raping. And I was speaking to a missionary who said, this is just outrageous. Ideally, they should give them, heavy work to do so that they can use that energy in another way. In the sense that we have not taught, or men have forgotten how to control themselves, how their minds can be stronger than their bodies, because this is what they need. This particular missionary said, we are wired differently. And so by virtue of that, people tend to behave without thinking. So they're not engaging their minds. These men are not engaging their minds in the right value system to be able to control themselves so that they're not doing these atrocities. And so when we bring up our children, this is the sort of thing that we need to do. And there were certain situations where we would have initiation rites. That is when the older men would teach the younger men on how best to behave when they are in the presence of women. You cannot blame a man for finding himself attracted, but you can blame a man for taking taking somebody's by force. That you must blame him, because he has not learned how to control his mind. And so perhaps we need to have, I like the fact that we have a certain Pastor Mbevi who does a man enough, so that you recognize that you have a responsibility as a man to make sure that you take care of the people within your circles, be they young boys, be they young women, be they women, be older women, whoever it is, so that men's minds can be strong enough to overcome the desires of their bodies. In that way, the women are going to be protected. Because if that doesn't happen, then the women are still in danger. And so let's bring up our children with the right value system, and they'll be in a better position to be able to know how to control themselves.
Thank you. Dr. Funsho, about your book, you're writing a book about manliness. What's in that book that every man needs to know, and that would help them create a safer community, a safer society, and enable the men who will read your book, or the different women who read your book, to have a set of value system that promotes equality?
Thank you, Jim. Listen, I want to jump on this, and thank you. I wanted to talk about the central role that masculinity plays in our society. Now, let's talk about the teenage pregnancy as a case study. Now, if you have ever had a chance to impregnate someone, you know that oftentimes it's not the first time that leads to pregnancy. So if you're talking about hundreds of teenage pregnancy, that speaks to the fact that there has been a social relationship that is not acceptable to the society in a way. And when you think about the way men are wired, element of dominance is at the center of how they exude their masculinity. So it could be using economic power, it could be money, it could be identifying the vulnerability of the other person and try to, find yourself in taking advantage of that. It could also be the fact that you present a case study or a personality that the other person is not complete without you. And over again, when you consistently do that, it's just like pushing a force on a wall. Before you know it, a lot of people will respond, a lot of girls. And this is often what has happened. I want you to understand, we must understand as a society that teenage pregnancy is almost like the symptoms of a deep-rooted interactions that is going on. An interaction of dominance, interaction of exploiting the vulnerability of certain group, an interaction of the fact that someone thinks, particularly the male, that in this society we're not equal. So for you to step up, you must come along with me. And that comes down to how do we fix it? It's a value-based system. This system must start from the point of birth. The simple thing like tell your boy to apologize to the lady for doing that. And to keep a notion of punishment like your sister or your female cousin must be given the same respect that you give yourself as a person. And I think it's very, very crucial to be able to start that. You must start very young. On the other side, again, I think it's important for our women to also understand that, listen, never accept the lies that you're incomplete without him. Because men are wired to exploit that. So if he can make his money, you can also make your money. And these are things, the society has a role to play such that we reduce the level of poverty or a level of survival instinct that will push people to do things that are below human dignity. And oftentimes, this is how a lot of young girls have been exploited. So second point again is we must also help our girls to have a sense of confidence in who they are and who they are going to become in the future. And that comes to me in the ability to raise what I call masculine female. To say, listen, you have as much power to become that conscious of your identity the way he is. And to also understand that there are things that you have that he doesn't have. And without your permission, he can never get across with you. And that for me is a combination of both. So we're training the boys on the one hand to understand that. And I'll be honest with you, from my research, our value system is completely flawed. The way men, from a young age, a boy thinks it's a girl's job to wash the dishes, and it's gradually growing with the notion that, I only do some other stuff. I don't do those things. But that's a role that parents have to play in order to allocate what I use the word masculinity. The last point again is, men are unique in a way because our maleness confers on us a certain way of behavior. And it's not just in the human kingdom, it's in the same in the animal kingdom. So in my book, I was also trying to compare maleness in a lion, maleness among ants, maleness across every biological being to be able to get a sense of why do you act the way you act? And that is a consciousness of your maleness, dominance and all that. So again, we must do two things. We must train our boys to understand that the other person is as important as yourself. So if you treat them well, you treat yourself well. Secondly, we must encourage a society that reduces the vulnerability of the girls. And as much as possible, the third thing is we must also encourage our girls to say, listen, you are enough. Do not allow someone to sell you a lie, an ideology that is not true. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Funsho. We are about to bring this to a wrap. But before that, Stella, I want to bring you in and just listen to this. 90% of gender-based violence reported cases cite men as perpetrators. 90%. 1 in 3 women have experienced an episode of sexual violence before the age of 18. Between 39% and 49% of Kenyan women experience gender-based violence in their lifetime. And I could go on, and 41% of ever married women have experienced physical or sexual violence in their marriage. And so one of the things that gender-based violence does is that it reduces the negotiating power of a woman for safer sex. That as a woman, you're not able to negotiate for that. And we know the risks that accompany that particular trend. How do we, and I know Funsho has spoken widely about how we engage boys, but how do we engage girls early enough as well to make informed decisions about their health, to make informed decisions about things like that? Because if she's abused today, the first thing we'll ask her is, what was she wearing? Why did she go? What was she looking like? So how do we empower these women now, early enough? Are there programs, are there platforms that we can use to do that women can?
Yeah, I think we have to teach them about independence, and we have to facilitate their independence. So they need to love themselves as they are, but they also need to be facilitated to have their own independence. And this is socially, economically, and politically. Because one of the reasons why we have so many cases or prolonged, so you're a victim of gender-based violence, but you're not living. Why? Because of your economic vulnerability. And that's the reality. So that you do not know what to do after you've experienced violence. You do not know what to do if you leave, because where will you stay? What will your children eat and all that? So it's about teaching them about independence, but to also facilitate that. And that's why I go back to the issue of gender responsive public services. Yeah, we have to invest in what women need. Yeah, we have to. But I also have to say that if I was a mother of a boy, but I'm an aunt of a boy, I would say accept a no from women, from girls, yeah? And don't resort to your physical power, your masculinity to exert power on her because she said no. Learn how to live with a no. And understand that it is okay for a woman to be powerful. It's okay for a woman to be a leader. It's okay for you don't have to always resort to physical power because you disagree. That you can actually live separately or just go separate ways because you disagree. But the problem with patriarchy is that it makes men want to exert their power, and it makes women want to live with that power, tolerate that power. So I'd say, let's facilitate women's independence and start teaching them about independence at a very, very young age. And also, Jim, I have to say that we also need to stop scrutinizing women more than we scrutinize men in leadership, yeah? And we also have to stop expecting too much from women, yet we do not expect too much from men. And I've seen it a lot on media when I see women asked, especially women in politics, so how do you balance between politics and family? But nobody has ever asked President Uhuru Kenyatta how he balances between his children and wife and politics, yeah? But when you watch any media interview with a woman who is in politics, she has to be asked, so how is it that that you actually are in politics and you still have a family? So is it the role of a woman to keep and manage a family, or is it for both? So double standards and too much expectations of women is one of the reasons why gender inequality exists. And it's okay for a woman not to be able to have her family together. She's also human.
Jim, I wish
Jim,
I wish to respond a couple of things.
Jim,
I will have
one point quickly, just one point, Jim.
a quick second.
Stella, yeah. God bless you. As parents, we have a role to play in helping our boys handle rejection. Rejection is really hard for men to handle in whatever form it comes, because rejection pierces through the ego. And the ego of a man is very much the software of his life. So you're dealing with the hardware, which is the computer. You're like, is this tall? Is it this big? Whereas the real issue is coming from the software. And this software, if it's already, if it's got a virus, a COVID virus that comes through rejection, it may never recover from it. And the final product is just a messed up man that it still looks good outside, well-educated, well-spoken, very good looking, but the systems, the software that drives his life, it's already corrupted.
Eddie?
Just before you close up.
Thank you, Jim. Just a couple of things.
One thing before ending. I want us to be very careful to let the girl child know that I'm repeating the answer, no is an anointed answer, all right? What happens a lot of times is that you can change something when you are disappointed, because men will say, do you love me? The only way you can show me how you love me is to sleep with me. And when the girl sleeps with that person and that person walks away, then they change the story and they say that they were raped. I want women to recognize that they are valuable to themselves and they must make sure that they take care of themselves and they say no, and they do not need to be coerced into trying to prove their love to anybody, because that is one of the traps that the girls fall into, and we get these teenage pregnancies. When the time is right, you will get the right man, and the right man will wait for you if he indeed truly loves you.
Thank you so much, Dr. I'm going to bring you, Eddie, in, but I have to just say thank you so much to our audience for keeping this conversation going. Jimmy Kagoni, you have quoted Maya Angelou. God created my abilities first before he created my sex. Just to paraphrase your long sentiment. Rita Gatumu, thank you so much for your statements. Helen Owor, that it is important to have sensitization to change people's mindsets, that women too can lead and should be given an equal share of opportunity without discrimination. Thank you so much, Tess Njoki, Odhiambo, Kauma as well, Cheboy, and Sophie Simon says an interesting thing. She says, yes, leadership is beyond and above politics. In my space, I have to literally look for men because we have more women. That's the rare cases. That's the exception to the rule, Sophie Simon. And just Faith Odwaro, parents must take their place in bringing up their children to be responsible citizens and leaders. I now want to ask my panelists to give their parting shot, and I'll start with Eddie, and then we'll work it out. This will be your final statements to our audience, and you can say your goodbyes.
Thank you very much, Jim, and thank you to my fellow panelists for such an engaging discussion. I wish to say two things in closing. When I received this invitation, and I had a personal conversation with Jim over the same later this afternoon, we talked about finding solutions around all the problems that we have discussed this afternoon. And I think if we have to make any meaningful progress, we must now move away from affirmative action and justice and get into building solutions within the society, which then means that we have to go back to interrogating how we can develop a better value system, and the discussion must then move away from girls alone to boys and girls, because the risk we're going to run into, if we only take one perspective, is that eventually the boy child is also endangered, and I'm sure Dr. Funso will agree with me on this. So we do not want to get to a situation in which the scales are tilted, and the boy child now faces the same challenges a girl child faces today or worse. So my challenge to Stella and to Dr. and to all of us is that this discussion and debate must now move back to how do we teach our children to develop a value system that's going to transform this society in order for it to be reflective of the values that we would wish to see. In teaching our children about saying no, doesn't only apply to boys, it applies to girls as well. mutual respect applies to both self-respect. And it is highly likely that if you have self-respect, you're going to have mutual respect for every other person. Now, lastly, specifically to Stella, and I'd like to challenge you, Stella, and to challenge all the women and girls out there. You said that you're waiting for a time when the political space is going to be safe in order for you to engage. It is not even safe for men, so it is unlikely that it's ever going to be safe in the foreseeable future. Politics is about interest, and there's a very huge interest that you have and the burden that you have in data power, and that is to entrench gender mainstreaming, to go beyond legislation to policy and practice. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it in political positions. We all agree it can be done at the community level, but of course there's a fair share of leverage in the political space that we're talking about. And so I'll challenge you once again that you have to run, and you have to encourage all the women and girls within the community of Emerging Leaders Foundation to run. There's a lot of power in synergy and numbers and consistency, and the more that happens, the greater that space is going to be open, and I think a better society is going to come out of it. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have this discussion this afternoon.
Thank you. Stella?
Thank you so much, Emerging Leaders Foundation, the home of leaders. Thank you, Jim. Thank you to all my mentors in this panel. Such a great pleasure to do this together with you guys. For me, I have to say that the issue of equality has to be intersectional. So it starts with the family, and it has to go through the religious institutions, learning institutions, the media, the council of elders. It has to include everybody. So long as it's not intersectional, then years later, we'll have to come back and now start talking about, so how do we include more young people? How do we include more persons with disabilities? So we have to take advantage of this moment. And secondly, to say that we must stop expecting more from women. Let them be. I think it's a good thing, because we need our peace. And young women have to continue to be ambitious, and without being asked why are you running so fast? You know, you need to slow down because of this and this, because you need not to scare away people. So for me, I'd say let's respect each other's spaces and know that the empowerment of women is not the disempowerment of men, and that we all matter, and our inclusion really matters. Thank you so much.
That's very powerful, Stella. Thank you. Funsho?
Thank you, Jim. Thank you to this brilliant panel of speakers. And I must say, I mean, you've also raised a very good conversation, and I think everyone has been involved. Let me say this. I think for some of us who have understood the power and the absolute brilliance and leadership qualities that women bring on board, I think I'll encourage everyone to embrace it. I own an organization that is got 4 full-time staff. 3 of them are women, all below the age of 30, and they are all running, you know, doing absolutely fine. And I think if I may talk to the men, my parting words would be to the men. So first, our society must understand that we must work on both sexes in tandem. You don't, first of all, work with the women and then come back to the men. No. In order to make the gain, we must work on both together. We must understand. And it must be a conversation that involves both. You know, you can't talk about women without involving men, the same way you can't talk about men without involving women. For the young men out there, I think the best thing you can ever do is to master the man in you. Understand all of these, that master the man in you. The woman, it's an extension of yourself. And let me end by saying this. On a personal note, I'd rather be number 2 in God's plan for my life than to be number 1 in my own personal plan. I'll say this again. I would rather be number 2 in God's plan for me, as opposed to being number 1 in my own plan for myself. And if God has orchestrated it such that I will be led by a woman, that is the plan, that I will be more fulfilling, I'll be more fulfilled, and I'll be more impactful being led by a woman than in my own plan on leading that. And I think this is something we must understand. Number two, it's just a great space to serve. And it's important, the more you know that, we move away from this competitive mindset to a complementary mindset. We move away from a competitive mindset. Women are not our competitors. Rather, we both complement each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Ndeko, you get the final word here.
Wow, thank you, Jim. And thank you for allowing me to be on this gender balanced panel. Well done. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel with all of you. It's been a wonderful discussion. As we said in the beginning, why are you here? How would you want to see this thing? I realize that I still always have to come back to the fact that God created man and woman, and he created them the same. Each one had the same power. Each one has the same abilities. Each one has the capacity to do whatever they came to this earth to be able to do. And so I would like to encourage everyone, each and every person who is here today, to begin to find out, why am I here? Who am I? How can I be the best of who I am and the best of who I came onto the earth to be? Whether it is a leader in your own particular area, whether it is a leader of yourself, but leadership is about influence. And so it's a privilege for me to be with emerging leaders. And I trust that a lot of us on this particular platform right now are leaders in their own right. And I've heard some from the various different comments that Jim has shared with us, that you are leaders and you are within your own communities, having influence. The one thing that I would like to leave with you is to please have the influence within the society that you are in to be able to change the mindset that the woman is any lesser or the man is any greater. That each and every individual one of us has the capacity to do what we are able to do. And I would like for each and every one of us to increase, to get to the highest potential that we can be so that we can play our part in society. We will be the nucleus that is going to change Kenya to get to the point where men and women will have equal opportunities and men and women will do what they have to do to see this nation go forward. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you so much, ELF. It's been a great pleasure to be with all of you.
And thanks to all my wonderful panelists. To our audience, the story of Emerging Leaders Foundation is her story. One time, we went to a place and realized that there was a building full of old men and there were no women in that room. And we came back to Kenya and decided that we needed more women to ascend to positions of authority, and we needed more young people to ascend to those positions. And for the last 8 years, we have dedicated our lives, we have dedicated our time to seeing that happen. To all the women who are pushing the boundaries of structural and patriarchal systems in this country, power to you.